My first story is about an actual Republican alternative. So, Republican Congressman Matt Gates has or will propose what he calls a Green Real Deal, which is supposed to be an alternative to the Green New Deal.
I just
Uh,
want to jump in for a second and say that, okay, when you're copying the person's language, it's not going to be a good, you're not an original thinker. I think this will be borne out by the rest of what you say, but there's something really off with if somebody proposes something horrific called a Green New Deal, you better, why are you basically copying it? Anyway, go on.
yeah, I think it's somewhat appropriate because for reasons that will be revealed soon. So, a five-page draft version has been leaked, and of course, it's not a final version. But if it resembles anything uh, that the final version will be, it's, in my opinion, an absolute train wreck because it generally acknowledges all of the things that the Green New Deal claims. So it's a resolution and makes certain statements about what is happening in the world and then what we need to do about it or what Congress needs to do about it. And I just want to give a quote from the very beginning of that. So the resolution says, and while mitigation and adaptation efforts have expanded substantially in the last 4 years, they do not yet approach the scale considered necessary to avoid substantial damages to the economy, environment, and human health over the coming decades. And that's, of course, references to the damage of climate change. And in this very sentence, it gives away the moral high ground, of course. It acknowledges, oh, this is a big catastrophe that's coming our way, and here's how we approach it. And so it presents as positive, of course, natural gas production in America soaring over the recent years, but it also says, oh, yeah, solar capacity, wind capacity go up, electric vehicles go up, and so on. So, sort of the all of the above approach that some Republicans had already shown. And it also pretends, similar to the Green New Deal, that all these programs that we need to start to deal with climate change will actually be a big economic boon to the United States. So creating jobs and profits for companies, putting America in a leadership position, and so on. And some differences between this and the Green New Deal is that the new resolution says that carbon sequestration, hydropower, nuclear power, and other alternatives need to be invested in. But it also encourages more solar and wind deployment. So if I had to summarize it, it says, oh yeah, we agree that a climate catastrophe is a big deal and we need to get away from fossil fuels, but we don't want the radical things in the Green New Deal. We are not as ambitious, and we also think that something like natural gas can be part of the solution.
Yeah, so I mean, there's something here. So I've become really interested in working in my work in general and in working on moral case two in particular on how do you think about the right policies if CO2 is a problem? Because it's an interesting thing to think through and it's important to think through because it's hypothetically possible it could be, and stuff those kinds of problems can hypothetically exist. And so it's good not to just say, well, we're relying on the fact that it has such a benign effect and even has some positive effects, and that the energy effects that it comes with, or the abundant energy that comes with emitting CO2 is so overwhelming in its benefits, including its climate benefits compared to the CO2. That's true. So that's important to make as just stating the truth. But it is important to think about, okay, what would you do if, if this byproduct of CO2 was a big problem? And it's worth just noticing how Gates or Getz or whatever his name is, I apologize for not knowing the pronunciation, how his view, basically what he's adopting is just the conventional nonsense of just, oh, there are just all of these things that people talk about as in some way related to lowering CO2 emissions. And so I'm just going to repeat all of those, including solar and wind deployment, which have the problem of They're not cost effective. They actually end up emitting a lot of CO2 because of how much they cost to build and then how much less efficient they make the fossil fuels that they depend on. So you want to really think about, it's worth thinking about, okay, what are the actual cost effective ways, or most cost effective ways I should say, to reduce CO2? What would that look like? That's a legitimate kind of exercise. And if he did that, I think it would be problematic even then, given the state of the actual facts, but it would at least be useful. And then we could talk about things like decriminalizing nuclear and at least investigating certain forms of CO2 capture, and then looking at geoengineering. I mean, you could think of there's I was thinking of this today working on a section of the book, and there's certain buckets that things would fall into. So one is the bucket of, how can you eliminate or minimize byproducts, and so that's the kind of the category of having different forms of energy, or like nuclear, or using more natural gas, or even looking into, well, those would be some main ones. And then also you can ask, well, how can you, I guess the other thing would be CO2 capture. You could do that, and then that would benefit not only energy production, but you could theoretically pull CO2 out of the atmosphere if you really, really needed to. And then that's the category of how do you minimize it or neutralize it, and then there's the category of how do you um, offset it, and how do you offset its climate effects, and then that would be things like attempting to somehow cool the earth. So you want to think of it systematically and scientifically, which includes precisely, and that's just what is not happening at all. So it's mimicking this conventional focus on just all these different things, but really this obsession with renewable being natural. And that is a focus that leads to very, very bad energy solutions, really leads to energy problems.